Hello, everyone. Welcome to Outside the Studio. This is Tessa. I'm so excited to be joined by Michelle T. Michelle T is the author of over a dozen books, and really excited to speak with her specifically about her latest work, which is Modern Magic, Stories, Rituals, and Spells for Contemporary Witches. I might have said that backwards, Michelle. Was the intention for it to be read top to bottom?
No, it's not. It is a subtitle. I don't know why the designer did that. It actually never occurred to me until right now that it could suggest that you would read it the opposite way.
I'm pretty linear in my thinking sometimes.
Sure.
But it is a beautiful book. I've been really enjoying reading it. So I
Thank you.
appreciate you doing this work and putting it out there in the world for us. What else do I want to say about you? Well, you're just like a seminal voice out there. And we were just speaking before I hit record about your podcast that has been sunsetted, but I'm sure it's still out there.
It is, yeah, Modern Magic. It was really fun while it lasted. There's some great episodes.
Yeah. So that's another platform you can connect with Michelle on. But today I really want to focus on modern magic and magic in general. Also, I know you're a prolific tarot reader, so I'd love to touch on that topic as well.
Sure.
And because there's such complementary practices, witchcraft and tarot.
I find them to be, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's where I'd like to start, is how you kind of weave them together, and for your own medicine and also with clients you work with.
Yeah. I mean, tarot was sort of my entry into other practices and getting deeper into, witchcraft, for a lack of a better word. It's a great word, but I feel like sometimes people hear it and they think, well, I don't do that, and when we're probably doing the same things, more or less. But yeah, I was like a teenager in the 80s in Boston, and I was goth, and me and my friends found tarot and started going to occult stores and just started doing magical work, and, separately, but always sort of talking about it and feeling like we were in a community around it, which is generally how my magic practice has always been. I've never been part of, a coven per se, but I've always had other people around me who also had their own sort of bespoke practices, and we learned from each other, normalized each other to some extent.
Yeah, I love that.
And for tarot, how I use tarot in my practice, well, it's so interesting. Today is the full moon, and every full and new moon, I do 2 special tarot readings with 2 special decks that I use specifically for that. This morning, I did the Syncretism Oracle deck, which I love. It's very, very mystical, and it takes its messages from Tantra, which I've been studying for about a year now, and more deeply. And it's been amazing. If for no other, it's been amazing for so many reasons, but I've also had this deck since like the 90s, and I've only ever understood maybe like 60% of it. So, but I've been so, I'll show you some of the cards because they're so gorgeous and spooky. Here's this like living goddess card. It's like this beautiful young woman in like outer space. And then there's some really funny ones, but it's always just been so fascinating to me. And now I get to really understand more what it's about. And so I do a chakra reading on the moons with this. And then I have another deck, the She-Wolf Tarot by Devony Amber Wolf, I believe is her name. And she's such a cool creator. And I do a special like moon reading on those. But, I'll pull cards daily to just sort of center myself, get a sense of what the day is asking me to pay attention to. I'll definitely pull cards if I'm ever in some sort of quandary or sort of vacillating between different options. So helpful to see sort of what the options sort of look like. And I'll often do I'll pull a card and leave it on my altar and do a little mini shrine on the shrine for the card, gather some rocks or objects that sort of relate to the image.
Yeah. I love hearing everyone has such a unique way of working with it. And there's a lot of similarities too, but I always feel inspired when others share with me their rituals and traditions, which is what this is all about, right?
Yeah.
And I wanted to go back, something I was reading through the introduction and something that we just touched on, like the word witchcraft, having kind of a little bit of like, I'm not sure I resonate with that word, a little bit of a negative connotation. And, maybe we choose a different word. We call it magic or ritual or spell or whatever it is. But I think that there's underneath that kind of initial like is a judgment that we have. And there's a little bit of what I'd like to see as an ability to hold dichotomy, to be able to see two sides. And this is what I kind of took away from this section I'm on page 9 in the introduction. If you don't mind, I just would read it.
Sure.
And the tools of the spellcasting trade to bring my practice into focus. So, I mean, you say it here, there's an ebb and flow.
Mm-hmm.
And there's, I guess I kind of want to unpack that a little bit in terms of this kind of, my sister and I, we grew up, in a very kind of what now people call hippy dippy, but I mean, my parents, we had a sweat lodge in the backyard and we had an altar. I mean, that's something that I grew up with since being a little one. If I had a stomach ache, I would hold a crystal to my belly. We had crystals in our water. So it was very much a part of our youth. And then as we got older, it was, even now it's kind of like, oh, well, that's whimsical. That's hippy dippy. What's the word people use that drives me crazy? There's a word. Yeah, woo. Woo is the word that drives me crazy. Because it has this kind of like, oh, I'm not taking it serious. It's dismissive. It's
right.
That can't be real or any sort of use. And that's such a negative spin on it, right? And that's my own.
Yeah, it is a negative spin on it. And I think, spirituality should be whimsical. I mean, it's a place of deep unknowns where we're acting and believing completely on faith. And it's connecting us to the deep unknowns of the universe. Like, why wouldn't it? Should absolutely be whimsical. I think that, there's times for it to be heavier and more serious as well. I mean, life gives us everything, gives us a lot to handle. And we often turn to magic in times of extreme grief or stress. But as a baseline for me, I love my practice being whimsical, being playful. And I'm never going to argue with anybody about whether or not it's working. You know what I mean? Like if I stand in front of my altar and I prep my altar and I arrange things and do what I do and something's working on me, I feel lovely. The moment feels elevated. My space feels elevated. That's not necessarily quantifiable in that scientific way, but this is a realm that's outside of that. It's outside of logic. It's outside of certainty. And I think that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And surely, as somebody who was raised Catholic and asked to believe in all of these things that seem ridiculous, I get it. I get people also being like, well, what the hell is the difference between believing that there's, a dude in the sky watching you or believing that your crystal is infused with this particular vibe? And I would just say, who the hell wants a guy up in the sky watching you? That sounds awful. And isn't it nice to think that this crystal is infused with something that's lovely and that can aid me in some way?
Well, and I think that's exactly it. It's the crux of it. And this is a theme that's threaded throughout the book, modern magic. The mystery is absolutely okay and very much part of magic, and what we're seeking to not necessarily understand but embrace is the unknown. And you're right, it is scary for us, but it's very much a part of the magic. So I think that's kind of like, yes, that's what I'm trying to get to with this conversation around, can we hold both the dichotomous feelings of, well, maybe that's true, but I can't prove it. And some days I feel like my magic works like this, and some days that feels like a cop-out. So, and we have both.
We do have both, and for this kind of practice, I mean, and I'm only speaking for myself, I'm sure out there somewhere there are absolutely Orthodox witches and Orthodox pagans, but that's not my experience of engaging in these practices. So you can adapt them to the ebb and flow of your own interest and energy. But then it's true that sometimes I'm like, you're just being lazy. You're just being lazy. Like, why don't you get up and do that thing that actually makes you feel good and makes your life feel a little bit more like meaningful, instead of just being like, oh, I'm vibing right now. That's my magic. It's just me laying here vibing.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I also wanted to talk about, in terms of actually doing the work, there's like a setup process that you go through, and I love that you use the elements in representing the 4 or 5 elements in setting up your altar. And so can we talk a little bit about how you use those elements?
Yeah. The four elements is something that feels so universal. Like so many cultures think about there being like 4 or 5 elements, the fifth being spirit. And it does feel like a good grounding, sort of orienting concept to use with magic. So it is like a traditional, I guess, concept that really appeals to me. So, for fire, I love having a candle. I have a candle. I don't know if you can see my altar behind me right now. It's over there it's just on top of that bookcase. So I have a candle, a pink candle to the goddess in the form of the Virgin of Guadalupe on my altar right now. I love that I can get all these great candles at my grocery store down the street. It makes magic shopping so easy. So that's representing fire. For water, I have this really puzzling bottle that I bought at a charity shop in Scotland, and it's wavy. It's goes in and out and in and out, and it makes it so that the water is incredibly hard to actually pour out, and it actually doesn't evaporate quickly either. So it's kind of mysterious the way emotions are, and in the subconscious and everything that water represents. I also have a really big piece of dead broken coral that I found on a beach there, and I have flowers on my altar, so there's water represented there as well. For earth, I have crystals. I have some quartz and some tourmaline from the earth. For air, I like to use burnables. So I have today some violet incense that's for Saint Lucy, who's a Catholic saint that I like the Catholic saints a lot. I wrote about that a little in my book. And then for the element of spirit, I mean, there's flowers. That's also earth, I suppose. I have a photo of me with my deceased grandmother, who I dedicated my book to, me and her and my sister together on a vacation up there. And I also have a picture of I've been, like I said, I've been studying Tantra. So I have a picture of my teacher's guru, as well as Amma, the hugging saint you might know about. She's this incredible living Indian saint who hugs people and gives them chocolate and rose petals. And I got to get a hug by her earlier this year. So I have a photo of her there too.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I was curious too, when I was a kid and we'd set up our altar, this might be more of a Native American tradition. There was a call to the directions, northeast, southwest. Do you use any of that in your ritual work?
I don't, and I am familiar with that. And I think that it's also a pagan tradition, and I don't know if the pagans lifted it from Native American. I don't know the actual origin of it. But no, I don't call the directions. For whatever reason, it doesn't super resonate with me. I respect it, but I don't feel personally inspired by it. Maybe because I have no sense of direction, and to me, I think I tried it out, and it just felt like I was doing somebody else's ritual, and it didn't really resonate enough for me to keep it. I'm like, wait, where is north?
It always takes me
just according to wherever I am in any place, because I'm the center of the universe. I don't know. I mean, there's something nice about that, but then there's also something dangerous about that. So
absolutely. Well, I mean, I think that's very wise to recognize that it's a truth that doesn't resonate with you. And that's so cool. I think sometimes we do ourselves a disservice by trying to take on, I mean, in the podcast, when I get to talk to people like you, there's all of these tips, tricks, and tools that we get to come away with, but it can be kind of overwhelming to know what's going to work for me, what's not. And it's a little bit of that process of trial and error to figure out.
For sure.
How to build your own practice, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, when I was younger, I was really eager to try everything out, and so I think if you're just eager in that way, you learn. And then I think if you're not necessarily eager, but you're curious, I think you can just follow what sounds like, that sounds fun. I want to do that. Is that something you want to do? I want to bake a cake and have it be a spell. Do that. You know what I mean? Or I want to have little piles of, Himalayan salt in the corners of my room. Go for it. But if something else just sounds exhausting or confounding in some way, then, it's probably not your practice.
Yeah, it's really good to pay attention to that too.
Yeah.
Well, and I want to talk about spell work a little bit more in depth, that you have so many good suggestions in the book. Are there any that are favorites of yours, or any that you feel like for someone who's wanting to get started in spell work, you would recommend beginning with?
I think for beginners, I think just there are some kind of build an altar, center yourself around it, and like feel your energy. Meditation sort of things I think are actually really great for beginners. This might sound really advanced because it's talking a little about like connecting with ancestors, which might sound a little bit too out there for people. But I truly believe we all have intuition and intuitive powers. And I really do believe the best way to enhance your own, whether they feel very dormant or just sort of haphazard, is through meditation and sitting and listening for messages and trusting that what you get is actually a message. And there's some things in there. The one that's in there is specifically about making contact with like a chosen ancestor. But I think that can work for anything. Like you don't necessarily have to have the intention of like, I'm going to contact a particular spirit. You can just sit and just sort of look at what comes to you and be thoughtful about that. It's sort of a way of doing divination just with your own psychic antenna.
Yeah.
I like that.
I love that. And I think that I'm probably not alone here in terms of I think for me, the barrier to entry with that is that I have to get past my logical skepticism. That's so strong.
We all do. It is really hard. And it's really kept me from leaning into a practice like that for like my whole life. Even as I've been doing tarot and working with intuition that way. And even as I've had like completely random psychic impulses about things where suddenly I just knew something, but it's always something that's totally meaningless, totally useless, like uncanny, but not helpful, kind of how it's been for me. But I always was stopped by thinking, well, I'm never going to believe anything that comes into my mind. I'm just going to think I'm imagining it. And I'm going to frustrate myself. I'm going to make myself a little crazy. It's just like, I'm not going to go there. And then at some point, I turned 52 last year. I'm 53 now. And it was suddenly this like reckoning age where I'm like, oh, anything that I always thought maybe I'd investigate like later or do later, like I better start doing it right now. And so I was like, oh, I should just decide to take it seriously and see what happens. And so I started doing meditations that are more sort of channeling. And it actually is really incredible. And much like a lot of the practice where I don't trip out on like, is it real or what, I'm just like, I just honor it for what it is and stay open. That's sort of the spirit that I sat down to do channeling meditations. And I do in fact get a lot of information in the forms of sudden thoughts, sudden feelings. And I just kind of make note of it. I write it down immediately and then just kind of try to go back into the meditation. It's been a very, very cool practice, really unexpectedly. I am not standing in my way and it's not making me feel nutty, even though sometimes I'm like, having to speak in public and I'm talking about like communicating with like a spirit of a past writer that I love. And I'm like, I'm not asking you guys to believe that I'm doing this. Like you can if you want, but also I don't care if you do. Like this is just the story of what's happening here,
Yeah. Well, and I think that's such a good practice to make sure that you carve out for yourself. And I'm speaking from the lens of, so what I think and I kind of started to go there when I said the thing about the dichotomy, and also my skeptical mind kind of gets in the way. But what I've noticed, and I noticed this with myself, and I noticed this with other women who are close to me who get into relationships, and then all of a sudden it's like, and maybe this is part of a natural evolution of being in a relationship with somebody. It almost feels like we lose ourselves in the partner, and in that loss, a little bit of that sacred space that we carve out for ourselves with practices and rituals like this get either just deprioritized, or it almost feels like, and I'm watching a close friend go through this right now, it almost feels like where there was no questioning of it before as being part of their lives, now it's suddenly like this thing that has to be kept on the hush hush because we're not sure if the partner's on board with it. So I don't even know if there's a question in there.
That's so sad.
It is, right?
It is. Yeah. I mean, there's one part of that feels like a little just sort of situational or inevitable, that when you add something new to your life and a relationship is such a big thing, you just have less time. So it makes sense that something like that could fall, that your ritual practice could kind of fall to the side. I know that, when I was single, I would have this like elaborate bedtime ritual that I would do, and I don't do it anymore because I now cuddle with my partner and we watch, we fall asleep watching true crime or something like very not spiritual like that. So I noticed that that's something, but I also just make sure that I do it at other times, and I'm lucky that I guess that I have a partner who, he's not particularly spiritual, but he's very open, to the unknown. He is a believer in things, and definitely respects my practices and gives me space for them. I think it'd be very hard for me to be with somebody who thought it was all a bunch of hooey. I would feel really disrespected. Not that I need somebody to join me, but I just need it to be respected. There's also something where, like, I think we come to these practices to kind of get close to the magic of life. And then falling in love is so much the magic of life that I can see how you're just like, oh, I'm getting that over here right now. But I do think that there's a problem in, like, with femme people making their relationships their religion a little bit. And yeah, I don't know if it's estrogen. I don't know if it's hormonal. We're certainly raised to be like that. I think, it's certainly not necessarily discouraged by the culture. So yeah, I think it's a bummer, and it's just in line with other things that you just always need to kind of keep up your own self-care and your own time with your friends and your own, like, solo time, all these things that you need to stay on top of when you're in a relationship.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I find myself wanting to, especially in this particular instance, offer some advice, which is completely unsolicited. Nobody's asking me for my opinion.
Right.
But it's like you said, it's sad to watch somebody lose that, although I can see it because I've gone through it myself. So it's kind of like, who am I to be like, oh, you should do this and that. But I just feel like I want this magic, this tool, these rituals I want them to be embraced by somebody who's had them in their lives for so long. And it feels sad
of course. It's like all you can do is just light a candle for her on your own altar and hope that she's, being guided through something that might look kind of pointless from your perspective, but maybe there's something in there that she needs to go through. I don't know. From reading tarot cards, so many people come to a tarot reader when they're in a time of crisis, and so many people's crises are often romantic. And, when I'm reading tarot, I'll very often be like, well, here's what I think you should do. But, like, let's see what the cards say. And often the cards say something different. It's like I've had the experience of the cards being like, yeah, there's something there for you. And what it makes me realize is just that, even though we are all here trying to live our best life, that always for us means the life with the most ease, the most happiness, the most sort of like toys and prizes. It's like, that's not necessarily the point of our life, which is much more mysterious. And we are supposed to go through hardships. And so many of them are hardships we probably could have, avoided. We do it to ourselves. And I don't understand why that is, but I've seen it just again and again in tarot where somebody's just supposed to go through something that's going to suck, and I've also had to go through things that sucked,
Yeah. Well, and this is kind of related too. I wanted to, because I know you have experience with 12-step groups and in this way, how does that work influence your connection to magic?
I mean, my spiritual practice is super influenced by 12-step tradition. I love 12-step tradition. I felt very much when I got sober in that space that I was basically casting a spell on myself. I'm like, I think that we're casting spells on ourselves, and it's a very powerful spell. It's definitely changed my life. And at the very beginning of my book, I actually direct people to this particular piece of 12-step writing that really applies to everybody. It doesn't matter. You don't need to be an alcoholic or even in a particular crisis to get something out of it. It's called Just for Today. And so I use it as a piece of text to build a little like altar sit around where you're just sort of taking this moment, just focus on just today, just centering in the present, which is where all the magic always is. So yeah, and it was helpful. A lot of people, who are counterculture to, for lack of a better word, who do enter 12-step, get really stuck on the whole God thing. It can be a real barrier for a lot of people who need that program. And I was very grateful that I understood that God was, a stand-in for whatever you wanted it to be. And I did have a sort of belief or faith in a higher magic. And so it was easy for me to just, get, it's like the God of your understanding, I think is what they call it. And so for me, it was very easy to really embrace that and have it truly be like the goddess of my lack of understanding or, whoever it is.
Yeah. No, I think that's so helpful. And I love that. I think one thing I love about your work is, like you mentioned, your love of the Catholic saints. And you can take lessons from all religious practices, all sacred texts, and there's lessons in them. And what I really appreciate is that you remind us as readers that these are metaphors. It's not like literal gospel, right? So the lesson is in the metaphor, and you don't have to throw out Catholicism because of, the corporation that it is. And so I love that you speak to that too. But there's actually some wisdom there in these teachings. And I mean, they've been around for centuries, eons, for a reason. There's some wisdom there.
Absolutely. And especially when you're talking about Catholicism, which is the branch of Christianity that I'm familiar with. I was raised in a Catholic family. I went to Catholic school for 9 years. I mean, so many of those traditions were swiped from indigenous European, folk magic practices. So it's in there. And so that can be really fun to play with it in this new form. And it just gives me this feeling that like all spiritual practices are syncretic in some way. Like they're all just sort of like trading and borrowing from each other. I mean, as white people, we got to take it easy with that and not be super appropriative. But I think that, there was something really cool about, for me, recognizing when I first learned about the Afro-Caribbean magic traditions, like such as Santeria. I grew up in a city with a huge Caribbean population. And so there was a botanica. And at the point that I found the botanica in my town, I'd already been going to occult stores in Boston. I grew up in a little city called Chelsea. And when I went to the botanica, I was like, this is an occult store, but it's like so different. And there's all these like Catholic saints that I recognize from my Catholic, upbringing. And it was like such a trip for me. And I became very fascinated with it and really enamored of it. And I loved how, the incredibly like resilient, powerful history behind it, that it was, kidnapped and enslaved Africans, holding on to their own traditions and their own beliefs and their own pantheon and sort of hiding them behind, these Catholic saints. And then to me, then giving those Catholic saints this extra layer of persona and powers, to learn that, the Santa Barbara candles are, for the god Shango, who's like cross-dressed to get away from the husband of a woman he was with, who was chasing him out of town. So he like dressed up like a lady to get away. And it's just like these great stories that like queer the saint a little bit, or at least, make her a little more naughty than the Catholic Church would, of course, have her. Yeah, it's really cool. And again, like that's not my tradition, but I love it and have so much love and respect for it. And I've spent a lot of time reading about and thinking about it.
Yeah. And it comes through in your writing. And that's actually one thing I wanted to touch on, is that I found your writing to be so just immediately engulfing. And I was kind of, as I was reading through your book, I found myself imagining your writing space and maybe even your writing process, and visualizing like if you had casted a spell. And I wanted to ask you about your writing process and where you did most of your writing and what that was like, if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Yeah, no, not at all. I mean, I do most of my writing right where I am right now in my office at this like desk that I bought like decades ago at a flea market in San Francisco. And I do make sure that before I start writing, I do tend to my altar. I do want to create that sort of sacred space and that sacred time for it, because writing is also really mysterious. Like it's very how it works, why it feels like it works sometimes and doesn't other times. It's very mysterious. I sometimes teach a workshop called Writing for Witches, and I feel like it's really great because I feel like the urge to practice witchcraft and then the urge or compulsion to write, for me, they feel so similar. And I think that there's something sort of ineffable about both practices. And so they work really well together. Not to mention there's so many people, mostly femmes and women, who are both witches and writers, but don't feel like they have permission to like claim that, you know what I mean? And so that's kind of a fun thing to work with as well in the workshop.
So that's so cool. You'll have to, do you have any coming up?
No, because I've been so busy. I haven't had like a block of weeks that I can do, but I really I'm calming down. So I might do one coming up.
Okay. Well, make sure that we link to your website. So if you do have
I really promote them on Instagram. So my Instagram is at Michelle Teaz, Teaz. I always, whatever I'm doing is always there.
Okay, great. Well, I'll make sure that gets into the show notes.
Thank you.
And then the one other question I had about your writing process is if it's something that you do, the word that keeps coming to mind is ritualistic, but that's not the word I want to use, because to me, as an aspiring writer, and resonating with what you're saying about having that be a practice that is in tandem with spell work and ritual and being at my altar, I'm feeling like this is probably something that needs to be more consistent. And that's my rigid mind going, oh, you have to make this, a job, or it has to be work for it to get done. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, right. I don't know. I mean, to a certain extent, that's not untrue. If you don't make the space and time for it, then it probably won't get done. Unfortunately, I don't know how you are, but for me, once anything becomes listed as a job in the categories of life, I just don't want to do it and I avoid it and it fills me with dread. And I do have that struggle with my own writing. I forget that I like to do it, I forget that it feels good to have done it. And I will avoid it also. It's also hard, you have to for me, I have to overcome my initial, my mind's opinions about what's happening. And, that's a lot of mental effort to ignore that and keep going until you can, then at some point something clicks and that voice kind of quiets, but it's often hard initially to shut that voice up. So, you're also sitting down and facing, all your insecurities and your demons and stuff when you write. So it makes sense on some level that you would avoid it. But, I would say if your brain is trying to get it scheduled, then see, it might be trying to help you. Maybe to get it scheduled, if you're not doing it frequently enough to make you happy. I mean, I don't think there's any particular amount that anybody needs to be writing. Everyone's process is so different. I can go for a long time without writing, but then once I sit down, I'm very barfy. So it works. But yeah, other people, that's not the case. And you do need to be at it every day. And there's something to be said about doing it more regularly. You become so familiar with the way your mind, your psychology around your writing. You become very familiar with the ways that you try to block yourself, with what the negative self-talk might be. And then you're better able to actually deal with it.
I'm formulating a question about how we might, and it might not be writing, but if we're struggling with something where it needs to be done and there's a desire to do it, but there's some sort of blockage, is there a spell or some kind of work we can do at our altar prior to that would help?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really like red crystals. Carnelian, red quartz, red jasper, strawberry jasper, all of those kind of stones can be really great for just reminding you that you have that fire in your belly, that this is something that you want to do. I feel like red and orange candles can be really good to keep me strong, keep me going, keep me focused on this. And, any sort of one of the things that I do in my Writing for Witches workshops is I do have us all meditate before writing. And I find that to be really, really helpful because meditating really changes your brain space. It changes how everything feels. And so it's a really wonderful, easy way to just elevate your space and change the vibe, So maybe meditating, giving yourself, and there's so many, I mean, not to recommend an app, but if you're not a regular meditator, you might it's so easy. And I am a regular meditator and I still love Insight Timer, has so many free meditations. And I feel like really any of them are helpful because they just take the whole outside world, that you've internalized, and it just kind of ejects it for a minute and makes it so that you can be a little bit more focused. Another thing to do, I think, if there are people in history who have accomplished or done a good job at whatever it is you are wanting to do, put a picture of them on your altar, and it just reminds you, altars are, my teacher was saying something about this because he has many altars in his house, and he talked recently in a class about how it's just to it does this trick of reminding you of this part of your life, right? It's like, you can walk around with this intention to be, say spiritual and have ritual in your life, and get really caught up in the world and not really think about it. But, every day when I come to work in my office, my altar's right there looking at me. So I'm being sort of reminded or challenged or invited to bring that sense of magic into whatever work I'm going to be doing.
That's such a great idea. I love that so much. Michelle, okay, so I want to be mindful of our time. So maybe one or two more questions.
Cool.
I'd love to have listeners learn a little bit more about, you've spoken a little bit about your origin story, but this is it feels like a pretty niche area. And sounds like it started out with a little bit more tarot, and then the blend of writing and magic and witchery together. This is like your livelihood now. So would you tell us a little bit more about how that came to be?
Sure. It came to be just almost sort of organically, just by following the things that I really wanted to do, that I felt excited about, and that made my life feel meaningful. Also, I came of age in my 20s, like in the 90s in San Francisco, which was a very inexpensive place to live at that time, believe it or not. And so I was able to, pay my rent really easily, and I didn't have to. I could spend most of my time doing things that didn't actually pay me any money, which I still do, actually, bizarrely. So yeah, I never I didn't have a goal, I never was really particularly goal oriented. Like I amassed a lot of writing at one point and realized, oh, this could be a book, but I didn't set out to write a book simply because I hadn't gone to college. I grew up really lower working class. I just didn't know how a person did that, or if that was ever available to me. So it really was just by following the things that I loved doing and creating community for other people who wanted to join me in doing it has always been really, really important to me. So yeah, I moved to San Francisco in the 90s, and I started with a friend, Cindy Anderson. We started an all-girl open mic night. Open mic nights were really popular in the 90s, and we went to them all the time, but they were also just, literally anybody can get up. So literally anybody did. And you just had to listen to not even bad poetry, who cares, more power to you, but offensive assholes, and we were like, what's happening? San Francisco in the 90s was basically ruled by young lesbians. There were none were coming to these places because why would you? So we started an all girl, queer open mic, and it really took off, and it turned into a tour that we started doing and that I still occasionally do, called Sister Spit. And then, from there, I just was always writing, always producing literary events. At some point, a few things happened. I befriended my favorite writer, which I really encourage people to do. I just sort of made the poet Eileen Miles be my friend, and I'm so lucky that they agreed to that. Ultimately, they do have to consent to it, or it doesn't work. And, they really were incredibly helpful. They mentored me. It was never formal, I'm going to mentor you, but that is effectively what they did. They helped me get my first book published. And from there, so many of my books became, they were brought into the world by other writers who were like, oh, I'll pass it to my editor, just other writers always helping me. Yeah, I never had an agent until I published many books. And even then, my first agent never was, even I worked with my first agent for years, and I was still getting all my own book deals. She was just getting me a slightly better contract. So yeah, that happened. And then, meantime, I'm producing lots of literary events in San Francisco. And finally, this really wonderful older gay man whose activism had been about kind of lobbying in the city to get money away from the opera and the ballet and these other sort of very classic art forms, and take some of that money and infuse it into all these grassroots art organizations in the city that were being run and catering to queer people, feminist communities, communities of color. And so, he was actually quite successful and helped create this pool of funding that really goes to marginalized arts creators in San Francisco. So he helped me sort of take all the work I was doing and create a nonprofit. He was like, you have a bigger programming calendar than most fully funded, nonprofits, but you have no money and it's just you. So with that, I began Radar Productions, and I ran that nonprofit for 13 years. The last thing I did before leaving was I created Drag Queen Story Hour. I wrote a grant to do a Drag Queen Story Hour at the Harvey Milk Library in the Castro, and we got the grant. I didn't implement it. I wasn't, my successors did, and we know what happened after that, which is really great. Yeah, I don't know. And then, at any time, no one income stream is necessarily enough to float my boat. It's selling a book, selling an article, getting paid to do a gig, getting a grant, getting an award. And knock on wood, it's a very terrifying way to live, honestly. And I started living off of my art around the same time I became sober. And so it was such a leap of faith in all directions to feel like, okay, it's what happened was I kept, I worked at my final sort of day job was I worked at a bookstore, and they were very permissive with if I needed time off to do events or go on a tour or leave town to do a reading at a college. They were really great about it. And then it got to the point that I was taking so much time off, it just didn't make sense for me to keep popping by the bookstore. And I said, I guess I'm living off of this right now. And it was really scary. I'd be like, well, it looks okay for the next 2 weeks, but what about 2 weeks after that? And then it would be like, okay, it looks okay for the next couple months, but what about in 5 months? And then it's like, this year's okay. What about next year? And there's really nothing you can do except just trust and keep doing the work and hope that it keeps supporting you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's very
Thank you.
mysterious. I didn't come to it through, I didn't go to college, and I didn't, get an agent in college and sell a book, that just wasn't my path. So it always feels so precarious and like such a gift. And like, is it gonna vanish? And what happens if it does? And it's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're speaking to this theme that I'm wanting to pull some sort of summary out of, and it's kind of like this idea that I want us as listeners of Outside the Studio to feel inspired to bet on ourselves, to
Yes. Oh God, that's such a great way of putting it.
Yeah. And to not be scared of failing, and to not necessarily that you can't be scared, because I think
right.
that
You
the
probably
fear
will be scared.
Yeah. It's very real.
I'm scared every day. I really am.
Right?
It's like, it's so stupid. It's like, it's
But it's
ancestral
not.
probably.
It
It's
is.
like, it's just,
Yeah.
but you don't have to make all your decisions based on those fears.
Exactly. So I think the thing that I'm trying to verbalize is that yes, you're going to be scared, but maybe do it anyways. Maybe bet on yourself anyways.
Yeah.
And really, it's up to you how long you go with that. I do think there's a very tremendous amount of grit that comes with this lifestyle as an entrepreneur. And like you said, piecing together the income, because one income stream typically is not enough for most of us in this realm of work. And that's okay, right? I love that you're forging your own path. And when you forge your own path in that way, you allow others shed light on that direction. So you can see that it can be done, right?
I think that's absolutely true. It's like you create a little bit of an industry unwittingly, for yourself and for other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just love that. Well, is there any last, such a short period of time, but I always want you to, as a guest, as somebody with all of this work under your belt, all of these stories to tell, to feel like you said everything you wanted to say. So is there any last question that you would have hoped I would have asked you, or any topic that you wanted to touch on?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there's so many topics in the book. There's no way we're going to touch on them all. I talk about, how to clean your house, with magic and breath work. And there's just so much in there. When I sign off with you, I'm going to be doing one of the spells in the book. I'm going to be doing the apple cake spell, because I have an event for the book tonight in Los Angeles, and I want to serve the cake on the full moon. And so I'm going to be going and doing a spell in my kitchen. And have to collect items to build a little altar down there while I'm doing that. I encourage people to keep a little altar in their kitchen, but I don't even do it myself because my kitchen is just so, I have a kid and my 70-year-old mother lives with us, and it's just like, it's so hectic in there. I just feel like there's no place for it. It would just get destroyed. But I am going to set up a temporary one this afternoon. So yeah, no, I love everything we spoke about, and thank you for having me and talking about the book.
Oh my gosh, it's a pleasure. And I'm just grateful that I have a copy of my own that I get to refer back to, because for me, this is a resource that I will return to over and over again. So I really appreciate it. I'm going to hold it up again. If you are watching on YouTube.
Or on YouTube, I would have put on lipstick.
Cover.
Thank you.
But I love that your hair matches the book. Is that intentional?
It's not intentional, but I also am really into it. I've had my hair pink for almost like 2 years now, and I didn't know, the book wasn't initially meant to be pink. It was going to be this whole other thing, but no, I love it. And I did give myself a manicure to match it.
Pretty, yes.
For Pub Week, so that's pretty fun.
Congrats. It came out October 1st, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Good. All right. Well, we'll make sure that everyone can connect with you on the socials and they know where to find the book. Thank you so much, Michelle. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This was really fun.
Well, everyone, that concludes another amazing episode of Outside the Studio. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I hope you learned something new, maybe remembered something old, maybe felt inspired to apply something to your life. You can hear my dog in the background. She's doing a little happy dance. So Daisy enjoyed it. Anyhow, I wanted to just pop in here to wrap us up to say a couple of things. Number one, I have such an amazing team that helps me put these podcasts together. Without them, I wouldn't be able to bring these amazing conversations to you. So thank you to my producer, my director of creative services, my sound editor, my engineer, Consistency Media. Don't know what I would do without you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And the amazing creation and artistic musical genius, Drew Lovern. Thank you so much for putting together this music specifically for Outside the Studio. So unique to the show, only place you're ever going to hear it is right here. Thanks, you guys. You make my world go round. Stay well, everyone. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review, share on the socials, especially if it's a show that you think, hey, this could help somebody else. That's what this is all about, right? We're sharing information so that we're better, so that we're inspired, so that we're lifting each other up, and we're learning how to be in this world, living on this planet to the best of our ability, sharing information and inspiring one another. And that's my hope. That's my hope for the show. Take care.